When love became a transaction, I reached for my phone to ask my son Thomas what time his wedding ceremony would begin when my daughter-in-law, Lisa, looked directly at me and said with a chilling smile, "Oh, we already got married last night. We only invited people who mattered." The words struck me like ice water poured over my head. People who mattered. I, who for 3 years had covered their $1,300 rent every single month, who had purchased every stick of furniture filling their apartment, who had stocked their refrigerator when their cupboards were bare. I didn't matter. I stood there in the living room of my own home, gripping a phone that suddenly felt impossibly heavy, watching my son refuse to meet my eyes while Lisa settled comfortably onto the couch I had bought for them. The lavender dress I'd selected for his wedding hung uselessly in my closet, alongside the new pumps and the dream of witnessing the most significant day in my only child's life. I had spent $250 on that dress, imagining how elegant I would look in Thomas's wedding photographs. Photographs in which I would never appear. For weeks, I had been organizing every detail. I had set aside an additional $1,200 for their wedding gift. I had telephoned my sister Sarah in Arizona to share the joyful news. I had scrubbed my house from top to bottom, thinking perhaps they would come celebrate with me after the ceremony. All of it dissolved in an instant with those 4 toxic words. Only people who mattered. Thomas finally glanced up, his voice sounding rehearsed and hollow. "Mom, it was intimate. Very small. Just us and the witnesses." But I knew this was a lie. I'd seen the photographs on social media. I saw Lisa's parents beaming proudly beside the newlyweds. I saw her sisters toasting with champagne. I saw Alyssa's white gown, which I had helped finance with the $350 I gave her for personal expenses last month. I saw everything I wasn't permitted to witness. 1 week later, precisely 7 days after that humiliation, Lisa called me with an entirely different tone. She was no longer the confident woman who had excluded me from the wedding. Now she sounded frantic, almost desperate. "Barbara, the rent is overdue. The landlord is threatening us and says if we don't pay by Friday, he's going to evict us. You must have forgotten to make the deposit." Her voice wavered slightly, as though her world were crumbling. I remained silent for several seconds, remembering all the times I had rushed to the bank to make that deposit. All the times I had canceled my own plans to ensure they had shelter. All the times I had eaten crackers and soup so I could give them money for their luxuries. And now, after shutting me out of the most important moment of their lives, they had the audacity to call me as though nothing had happened. "Lisa," I said with a calmness that surprised even me, "I suppose I didn't mention it. I only help people who matter." The silence on the other end was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one trembling. She was. "Barbara, I don't understand," she stuttered. "We've always mattered to you. You're like a second mother to me." Lies, all lies wrapped in that honeyed voice she only employed when she needed something. The same voice she had used to request money for the wedding gown, for the honeymoon, for the rings I helped finance without knowing I would never witness the ceremony where they would exchange them. For so many years, I had lived with this constant sensation of walking on eggshells, measuring every word, every gesture, every gift, hoping to receive a morsel of affection from my own son. I had been the perfect mother, the accommodating mother-in-law, the silent provider who never objected when they treated me as though I were invisible. But that phrase, "only people who mattered," awakened something in me that had been dormant far too long. I mentally calculated how much money I had invested in them over these 3 years. Between rent, groceries, gifts, emergencies, and indulgences, it exceeded $70,000. $70,000 that I extracted from my pension, from my savings, from the money my late husband left so I could live comfortably in my final years. And for what? To be treated like a stranger on my own son's wedding day. That night, after disconnecting the call, I sat on my bed and wept. But they weren't tears of sorrow. They were tears of fury, of accumulated frustration, of years of humiliation swallowed in silence. I cried for all the times they made me feel like my love was a burden, that my presence was an inconvenience, that my money was the only valuable thing I possessed. I cried for the foolish mother I had been, for the woman who had lost herself trying to be indispensable to those who considered her disposable. When I woke the next morning, something inside me had transformed. It wasn't just the pain of betrayal. It was something deeper, colder. I rose from bed and looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The same weary eyes, the same lines that told stories of years spent giving love without receiving it in return. But there was something different in my gaze, a hardness I didn't recognize, a resolve that had been buried beneath years of compliance. I went to the kitchen and prepared coffee just like every morning for the past 45 years. But this time, I didn't think about calling Thomas to ask how his morning was going. I didn't check my phone hoping for a text from him apologizing for the humiliation. For the first time in ages, my first concern of the day was myself. I sat at the table where I had so often planned surprises for them, where I had counted out bills for their expenses, where I had cried silently when they treated me with indifference. Now that table would witness something completely different. I pulled out my checkbook, my bank statements, and began calculating. I wanted to see in precise numbers the magnitude of my own foolishness. Rent, $1,300 a month for 36 months. $46,800. Groceries, approximately $450 a month. Another $16,200. Birthday, Christmas, anniversary gifts, at least $6,000. Lisa's medical emergencies, $900. The loan for the car they never repaid, $2,000. The furnace repair for their apartment, $850. The living room furniture, $1,400. Over. $74,000. That was the exact figure of my squandered generosity. All that money pulled from my husband's life insurance, from my pension, from the savings I had accumulated penny by penny over decades of honest work, thrown away to keep two adults comfortable who couldn't even pretend to respect me. The phone rang, and I saw Thomas's name on the screen. Normally, I would have lunged to answer, my heart racing, hoping he would finally apologize, that he'd explain it was all a misunderstanding. But this time, I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. It finally stopped, and I kept sipping my coffee as though nothing had occurred. 10 minutes later, it rang again. This time, it was Lisa. I let it ring as well. Then a text message from Thomas arrived. "Mom, answer the phone. We need to talk to you urgently." I deleted the message without responding. At 2 in the afternoon, I decided to take a walk. I hadn't done that in months without a specific purpose, without an errand related to them. It was always to the bank for a deposit, the grocery store for something they needed, the pharmacy for Lisa's prescriptions. Today, I walked simply because I wanted to. I passed the park where I used to take Thomas when he was a little boy. I remembered that sweet child who would embrace me tightly and tell me I was the best mom in the world. At what point did he become this man who treated me like an ATM with feelings? When did I start confusing love with money? When did I begin believing I had to purchase my own son's affection? At the bank, where I had made so many automatic deposits, I stopped at the entrance. The manager, Mrs. Richardson, saw me through the glass and waved. She'd known me for years, had processed every one of my deposits to Thomas and Lisa, had watched my account drain month after month to fill theirs. I walked in and went straight to her office. "Mrs. Richardson," I said, "I need to cancel all the automatic deposits I have scheduled." She looked surprised. For 3 years, those deposits had been as regular as sunrise. "Are you certain, Barbara? Did something happen?" Her concern was genuine, more genuine than any interest Thomas had shown in me for months. "What happened is that I finally opened my eyes," I replied. "I want to cancel everything. And I also want information on how to protect my accounts. I don't want anyone else to have access to my money." While Mrs. Richardson processed the cancellations, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Thomas, Lisa, Thomas again. It was as though they had developed radar to detect when their source of income was in jeopardy. I turned the phone off completely. "Barbara," Mrs. Richardson said as she handed me the papers, "forgive me for overstepping, but in all these years, I've watched you be extraordinarily generous with your family. I hope they're not pressuring you to make these changes." Her words touched me profoundly. This woman, who barely knew me beyond banking transactions, showed more genuine concern for my well-being than my own son. "They're not pressuring me, Mrs. Richardson. On the contrary, I finally stopped pressuring myself. When I left the bank, I felt strangely weightless, as though I had deposited a massive burden in that office. For the first time in years, my money was completely my own. I had no financial obligations to people who saw me as a resource instead of a human being. I walked home thinking of all the things I had stopped doing to please Thomas and Lisa, the trips I didn't take to save money for them, the friends I stopped seeing because I was always available for their emergencies, the hobbies I abandoned because every dollar I spent on myself was one less for their needs. When I arrived home, I found 3 cars parked outside my door. Thomas's, Lisa's, and one I didn't recognize. I could see movement inside my house through the windows. My blood ran cold. They had keys. I had given them keys because I trusted them, because I thought one day they would care for me as I had cared for them. I took a deep breath before opening the door. It was time for the first real confrontation of my new life. I opened my front door to a scene I will never forget. Thomas was sitting on my sofa with his head in his hands. Lisa was pacing like a caged tiger, and an older man I didn't know was reviewing papers on my dining room table. My papers, my personal documents. "What is going on here?" I asked, my voice louder than I expected. All 3 looked at me as though I were the intruder in my own home. Lisa was first to speak, her voice filled with that desperate urgency I'd already heard on the phone. "Barbara, thank God you're here. We need to talk. Mr. Thompson is from the law firm we consulted about your situation." "My situation?" The question came out with a calm that amazed me. "What situation?" "I'm perfectly fine." Thomas finally lifted his head and looked at me with those eyes that were once a child's but now only reflected financial panic. "Mom, we went to the bank, and they told us you canceled all the deposits. Mrs. Richardson explained you also blocked our access to your accounts. We don't understand why you did that." Mr. Thompson, a man in his 50s with a gray suit and a smile that inspired zero confidence, approached me with his hand extended. Mrs. Walsh, I'm Gerald Thompson, an attorney specializing in family law. Your children are concerned about your mental well-being and asked me to evaluate the situation. I didn't shake his hand. Instead, I walked straight to my dining room table and gathered all my documents that he had been reviewing without my authorization. These are my private papers. You have no right to examine them without my permission. Mom, Thomas interjected with that condescending tone he had perfected over recent years, we're worried about you. Your behavior has been very strange lately. First, you cut us off financially without explanation. Then you don't answer our calls. We thought maybe you need professional help. Lisa came over and attempted to take my hand with that false tenderness she reserved for when she needed something. Barbara, honey, we know you've been under a lot of stress. Maybe the loneliness is affecting you more than you realize. It's normal at your age to have episodes of confusion. The word confusion rang in my head like an alarm bell. Now I understood why they'd brought the lawyer. It wasn't to help me. It was to have me declared mentally incompetent and seize control of my finances. The same woman who told me only people who mattered were invited to her wedding was now treating me like a senile old woman. I am not confused, I said with a firmness that silenced the room. I am more clear-headed than I have been in years, and you are all going to leave my house right now. Mr. Thompson stepped forward with that professional voice lawyers use when they want to sound reasonable. Mrs. Walsh, I understand you feel overwhelmed, but your children have a legal right to intervene if they believe your ability to make financial decisions is compromised. They've documented several concerning behaviors. Concerning behaviors? A harsh, almost cruel laugh escaped my throat. Like what? Deciding my money is mine? Choosing not to finance the lives of two adults who treat me like dirt? Lisa recoiled as if I had slapped her. We have never treated you badly. You're part of our family. Everything you have will be ours someday anyway. We're just accelerating the process. There it was. The naked, raw truth. Everything I had would be theirs someday. In their minds, I was already dead and they were just collecting their inheritance in advance. It didn't matter if I had 30 years left or 30 days. To them, I was just a walking bank account that had become problematic. Out, I said, pointing to the door. All three of you. Out of my house. Thomas stood up with the pouty expression of a child denied candy. Mom, we can't just leave like this. We have responsibilities. The rent, the car payments, the credit card you signed for. You can't just cut us off overnight. I can't? My voice rose for the first time. Who says I can't? For 3 years, I have paid rent on an apartment that isn't even in my name. I have filled a refrigerator in a house where I am not welcome. I have financed a life that clearly has no room for me. Mr. Thompson pulled a folder from his briefcase and placed it on my table. Mrs. Walsh, we've prepared some documents that could ease this transition, a power of attorney that would allow Thomas and Lisa to manage your finances more efficiently. It would be temporary, of course, just until you're feeling better. I took the folder and threw it directly into the trash without even opening it. The only transition happening here is you three walking out that door. Lisa started to cry, but they were tears of frustration, not sadness. You can't do this to us, Barbara. We were counting on you. We made plans based on your support. We bought things. We made financial commitments because we knew we could rely on you. Commitments based on my money, I replied. Not on my well-being, not on my happiness, not on my company. Just on my money. And now that I've decided my money has a better use in my own life, suddenly I'm a confused old woman who needs legal supervision. Thomas tried to approach me, but I took a step back. He was no longer the little boy who used to run into my arms after a nightmare. He was a 37-year-old man who saw his mother as an obstacle between him and a comfortable financed life. "Mom, we made mistakes," he said, his voice trying to sound regretful. "The wedding, it was a misunderstanding." Lisa was nervous. I was under pressure. "We can fix this if you'll just be reasonable again." Reasonable? The word tasted bitter. Being reasonable means I keep paying for your life while you treat me like a stranger. It means pretending it doesn't hurt to be excluded from the most important day of my only son's life. Mr. Thompson packed his papers with the efficiency of someone accustomed to rejection. "Mrs. Walsh, this isn't over. Your family has legal options. If you are truly making irrational decisions due to mental health issues, a judge can determine that you need supervision." His words were a physical blow. This wasn't just a manipulative family visit. It was a genuine legal threat. They wanted to declare me incompetent to manage my own affairs. "Mr. Thompson," I said, looking him straight in the eye, "I suggest you do your research before you threaten a 70-year-old woman who has managed her finances impeccably for 45 years, who raised a son alone after being widowed, who maintained a home, worked until she honorably retired, and who until last week was financially supporting 2 fully capable adults." Lisa stopped crying and looked at me with a coldness that finally revealed her true face. "This isn't over, Barbara. We have rights too. And lawyers." "Perfect," I replied. "Hire all the lawyers you want. With your own money, of course, because mine is no longer available to finance your legal tantrums." The 3 of them walked to the door, their pride wounded by being told no. Before leaving, Thomas turned back one last time. "Mom, this is going to end very badly for you. You're going to end up alone with no one to take care of you when you really need it." "Thomas," I said with deep sadness but also crystal clarity, "I'm already alone. The difference is now it's by my own choice, not by your neglect." When the door closed behind them, I stood in my living room, surrounded by the most beautiful silence I had heard in years. It was the silence of freedom. That night, I couldn't sleep. But it wasn't from sadness or regret. It was from the adrenaline of having reclaimed control of my own life. I lay awake in bed, planning my next moves like a general preparing for battle. If Thomas and Lisa wanted a fight, I would give them a war. But it would be a war one fought with intelligence, not emotion. At 6 in the morning, I was dressed and ready. My first stop was the office of Mr. Patterson, a lawyer I had met years ago when I handled my husband's will. Unlike the lawyer Thomas and Lisa had brought, Mr. Patterson had an impeccable reputation and specialized in protecting the rights of senior citizens. "Barbara," he said after I explained the situation, "what your children attempted yesterday is more common than you think. It's called elder financial abuse, and it's a federal crime. The fact that they entered your home without permission and went through your private documents is also a violation." His words were both calming and alarming. Calming because they confirmed I wasn't crazy, that what had happened was truly abusive. Alarming because I realized the situation was more serious than I had thought. "We need to document everything," Mr. Patterson continued. "Every deposit, every gift, every time they pressured you for money. We're also going to change your will to protect your assets from any future attempts at manipulation." spent 3 hours reviewing my financial records. Mr. Patterson whistled when he saw the total figure over $74,000 in 3 years. Barbara, with this money, you could have lived comfortably, traveled, enjoyed your retirement. Instead, you completely financed the lives of 2 adults who didn't even respect you enough to invite you to their wedding. When I left his office, I had a complete plan. First, I would change all the locks on my house. Second, I would install a security system with cameras to protect me from any more surprise visits. Third, I would open a new account at a different bank where they had no contacts. And fourth, I would start living the life I had been postponing for years. My next stop was the hardware store. The owner, Frank, had known me for years because I was always in there buying things to fix Thomas and Lisa's apartment. This time was different. "Barbara, what brings you in today? Another emergency at your son's place?" he asked with the familiarity of someone who had been a silent witness to my wasted generosity. "No, Frank, this time it's for my own house. I need to change all the locks, and I want the best quality you have." He looked surprised but didn't ask questions. While he was selecting the locks, his son Marcus, who installed security systems, came in. It was Providence in action. "Marcus," I said, "I also need to install security cameras. The complete system. Price is not an issue." While they prepared everything for the next day's installation, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Lisa calling from someone else's phone since I had blocked her number after yesterday's confrontation. "Barbara, it's Lisa. Please don't hang up. We need to talk like civilized adults." "Talk," I said dryly. "Look, I understand you're upset about the wedding. It was a mistake. Thomas and I have talked, and we want to make it up to you. What do you think about organizing a special dinner to celebrate our marriage with you? We could do it at your house. Cook together like old times." The manipulation in her words was so obvious it was almost comical. "Lisa, how much exactly do you owe in rent?" The silence on the other end confirmed I had hit the nail on the head. Well, it's 2 months. $2,600 in total. But that's not the only reason I'm calling. Barbara, we really miss having you in our lives. Do you miss me or do you miss my money?" I asked directly. "Both," she answered with surprising honesty. "Barbara, I'm not going to lie to you. Yes, we need your financial help, but we also love you. You're important to us." "If I'm so important," I said, "why wasn't I important enough to be at your wedding? Why am I not important enough to get a phone call that isn't asking for money? When was the last time you called just to see how I was doing?" Another silence. We both knew the answer: never. "Lisa, I'm going to explain this to you one time. For 3 years, you have treated me like an ATM with feelings. You have used me, ignored me, humiliated me, and finally insulted me in the worst possible way. Now that the money is gone, you suddenly discover you love me." "Barbara, please." "No," I interrupted. "There is no please. You made your choice when you decided I wasn't important enough to be at your wedding. Now I'm making mine." I hung up the phone and turned it off completely. I didn't want any more interruptions on my day of liberation. That afternoon, I went to the beauty salon where I hadn't been in over a year. I always canceled my appointments because Thomas or Lisa needed something urgently, or because the money I had set aside for myself ended up being for one of their emergencies. "Barbara!" shouted Christine, my favorite stylist. "What a surprise. I thought you'd forgotten about us." "I hadn't forgotten, Christine. I just forgot that I deserved to be pampered too. I got the full treatment cut, color, manicure, pedicure. For the first time in years, I spent money on myself without feeling guilty. While Christine worked on my hair, she told me about her life, her children, her dreams. It was refreshing to have a conversation that didn't revolve around the needs of Thomas and Lisa. "You look beautiful, Barbara," she said when she finished. "But more than that, you look free. Did something good happen?" "Yes, Christine. I finally learned to say no. When I got home that afternoon, there was a car I didn't recognize parked in front of my house. My heart sped up for a moment, thinking maybe Thomas and Lisa had returned with reinforcements. But as I got closer, I saw an older woman sitting on my front steps. "Barbara?" she asked as I got out of the car. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" "I'm Dorothy Nelson. I live next door. We've been neighbors for years, but we've never really had a chance to talk. I heard some very loud voices at your house yesterday, and I was worried. Is everything all right?" Her genuine concern touched me deeply. Here was a stranger showing more interest in my well-being than my own son. "Please come in, Dorothy. I'll make us some coffee, and I'll tell you a story you won't believe." As I made coffee, I told her the whole situation. Dorothy listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. And when I finished my story, her eyes were filled with tears. "Barbara," she said, "you did the right thing. I went through something similar with my son 6 years ago. I also thought it was my obligation to finance his adult life. I also believed that if I didn't give them money, they wouldn't love me. What happened? I cut them off when I realized they only called when they needed something. At first, it was terrible. They threatened me, emotionally blackmailed me, tried to make me feel guilty. But after 8 months, my son called to truly apologize. Now we have a real relationship based on love, not money." Her words gave me hope and confirmed I had made the right decision. "Do you think Thomas and Lisa will ever understand?" "Maybe, maybe not," she answered honestly. "But that's no longer your responsibility, Barbara. Your responsibility now is to live your own life." That night, for the first time in 3 years, I went to sleep without worrying if Thomas and Lisa had money for rent, for food, for their whims. I went to sleep thinking about myself, my plans, my future. And I slept better than I had in years. Lisa stopped crying and looked at me with a coldness that finally revealed her true face. "This isn't over, Barbara. We have rights too. And lawyers." "Perfect," I replied. "Hire all the lawyers you want. With your own money, of course, because mine is no longer available to finance your legal tantrums." The 3 of them walked to the door, their pride wounded by being told no. Before leaving, Thomas turned back one last time. "Mom, this is going to end very badly for you. You're going to end up alone with no one to take care of you when you really need it." "Thomas," I said with deep sadness but also crystal clarity, "I'm already alone. The difference is now it's by my own choice, not by your neglect." When the door closed behind them, I stood in my living room, surrounded by the most beautiful silence I had heard in years. It was the silence of freedom. That night, I couldn't sleep. But it wasn't from sadness or regret. It was from the adrenaline of having reclaimed control of my own life. I lay awake in bed, planning my next moves like a general preparing for battle. If Thomas and Lisa wanted a fight, I would give them a war. But it would be a war one fought with intelligence, not emotion. At 6 in the morning, I was dressed and ready. My first stop was the office of Mr. Patterson, a lawyer I had met years ago when I handled my husband's will. Unlike the lawyer Thomas and Lisa had brought, Mr. Patterson had an impeccable reputation and specialized in protecting the rights of senior citizens. "Barbara," he said after I explained the situation, "what your children attempted yesterday is more common than you think. It's called elder financial abuse, and it's a federal crime. The fact that they entered your home without permission and went through your private documents is also a violation." His words were both calming and alarming. Calming because they confirmed I wasn't crazy, that what had happened was truly abusive. Alarming because I realized the situation was more serious than I had thought. "We need to document everything," Mr. Patterson continued. "Every deposit, every gift, every time they pressured you for money. We're also going to change your will to protect your assets from any future attempts at manipulation." We spent 3 hours reviewing my financial records. Mr. Patterson whistled when he saw the total figure over $74,000 in 3 years. "Barbara, with this money, you could have lived comfortably, traveled, enjoyed your retirement. Instead, you completely financed the lives of 2 adults who didn't even respect you enough to invite you to their wedding." When I left his office, I had a complete plan. First, I would change all the locks on my house. Second, I would install a security system with cameras to protect me from any more surprise visits. Third, I would open a new account at a different bank where they had no contacts. And fourth, I would start living the life I had been postponing for years. My next stop was the hardware store. The owner, Frank, had known me for years because I was always in there buying things to fix Thomas and Lisa's apartment. This time was different. "Barbara, what brings you in today? Another emergency at your son's place?" he asked with the familiarity of someone who had been a silent witness to my wasted generosity. "No, Frank, this time it's for my own house. I need to change all the locks, and I want the best quality you have." He looked surprised but didn't ask questions. While he was selecting the locks, his son Marcus, who installed security systems, came in. It was Providence in action. "Marcus," I said, "I also need to install security cameras. The complete system. Price is not an issue." While they prepared everything for the next day's installation, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Lisa calling from someone else's phone since I had blocked her number after yesterday's confrontation. "Barbara, it's Lisa. Please don't hang up. We need to talk like civilized adults." "Talk," I said dryly. "Look, I understand you're upset about the wedding. It was a mistake. Thomas and I have talked, and we want to make it up to you. What do you think about organizing a special dinner to celebrate our marriage with you? We could do it at your house. Cook together like old times." The manipulation in her words was so obvious it was almost comical. "Lisa, how much exactly do you owe in rent?" The silence on the other end confirmed I had hit the nail on the head. Well, it's 2 months. $2,600 in total. But that's not the only reason I'm calling. Barbara, we really miss having you in our lives. Do you miss me or do you miss my money?" I asked directly. "Both," she answered with surprising honesty. "Barbara, I'm not going to lie to you. Yes, we need your financial help, but we also love you. You're important to us." "If I'm so important," I said, "why wasn't I important enough to be at your wedding? Why am I not important enough to get a phone call that isn't asking for money? When was the last time you called just to see how I was doing?" Another silence. We both knew the answer: never. "Lisa, I'm going to explain this to you one time. For 3 years, you have treated me like an ATM with feelings. You have used me, ignored me, humiliated me, and finally insulted me in the worst possible way. Now that the money is gone, you suddenly discover you love me. Barbara, please, no, I interrupted. There is no please. You made your choice when you decided I wasn't important enough to be at your wedding. Now I'm making mine. I hung up the phone and turned it off completely. I didn't want any more interruptions on my day of liberation. That afternoon, I went to the beauty salon where I hadn't been in over a year. I always canceled my appointments because Thomas or Lissa needed something urgently, or because the money I had set aside for myself ended up being for one of their emergencies. "Barbara!" shouted Christine, my favorite stylist. "What a surprise. I thought you'd forgotten about us." I hadn't forgotten, Christine. I just forgot that I deserved to be pampered too. I got the full treatment cut, color, manicure, pedicure. For the first time in years, I spent money on myself without feeling guilty. While Christine worked on my hair, she told me about her life, her children, her dreams. It was refreshing to have a conversation that didn't revolve around the needs of Thomas and Lissa. "You look beautiful, Barbara," she said when she finished. "But more than that, you look free. Did something good happen?" "Yes, Christine. I finally learned to say no. When I got home that afternoon, there was a car I didn't recognize parked in front of my house. My heart sped up for a moment, thinking maybe Thomas and Lissa had returned with reinforcements. But as I got closer, I saw an older woman sitting on my front steps. "Barbara?" she asked as I got out of the car. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" "I'm Dorothy Nelson. I live next door. We've been neighbors for years, but we've never really had a chance to talk. I heard some very loud voices at your house yesterday, and I was worried. Is everything all right?" Her genuine concern touched me deeply. Here was a stranger showing more interest in my well-being than my own son. "Please come in, Dorothy. I'll make us some coffee, and I'll tell you a story you won't believe." As I made coffee, I told her the whole situation. Dorothy listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. And when I finished my story, her eyes were filled with tears. "Barbara," she said, "you did the right thing. I went through something similar with my son 6 years ago. I also thought it was my obligation to finance his adult life. I also believed that if I didn't give them money, they wouldn't love me. What happened? I cut them off when I realized they only called when they needed something. At first, it was terrible. They threatened me, emotionally blackmailed me, tried to make me feel guilty. But after 8 months, my son called to truly apologize. Now we have a real relationship based on love, not money." Her words gave me hope and confirmed I had made the right decision. "Do you think Thomas and Lissa will ever understand?" "Maybe, maybe not," she answered honestly. "But that's no longer your responsibility, Barbara. Your responsibility now is to live your own life." That night, for the first time in 3 years, I went to sleep without worrying if Thomas and Lissa had money for rent, for food, for their whims. I went to sleep thinking about myself, my plans, my future. And I slept better than I had in years. The next day, Marcus and Frank arrived at 8 in the morning to change the locks and install the security system. While they worked, my phone kept ringing from unknown numbers. Lissa was still trying to reach me from different phones, but I had developed a new skill completely ignoring calls I didn't want to take. "Barbara," Marcus said as he installed the cameras, "this system will give you total peace of mind. You can see who's at your door from your phone, even when you're not here. And if anyone enters without permission, an alert is automatically sent to the police." The irony didn't escape me. I was installing a security system to protect myself from my own son. But it didn't hurt like before. It was simply a practical measure to maintain my newfound peace. While they worked, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years, call my sister Sarah in Arizona. We had lost touch because every time we talked, I would end up bragging about Thomas and Lisa's achievements, about how much money I had spent on them, about how proud I was to be able to help them. I realized now that our conversations had become financial reports disguised as family news. "Barbara?" Sarah answered, surprised. "Sis, how are you? We haven't talked in months." "I'm fine, Sarah. Better than fine, actually. I'm calling to tell you I've finally come to my senses." I told her the whole story from the beginning, the secret wedding, the humiliation, the visit with the lawyer, my decision to cut off the funding. Sarah listened in silence, and when I finished, her response shocked me. "Barbara, sis, it's about time." Every time we talked, it broke my heart to hear you boast about how much money you'd given them, as if love is measured in dollars. I wanted to say something, but I didn't know how. "What did you want to say?" "That Thomas never spoke about you with affection when I saw him at family gatherings. It was always my mom helped me with this, or my mom bought me that, but never I miss my mom, or I love my mom. It was as if you were a service, not a person." Her words hurt, but it was a necessary pain. Like when a doctor cleans an infected wound, it hurts, but it's part of the healing. "You know what else struck me?" Sarah continued. "Lisa always spoke of you in the future tense. When Barbara is gone, we'll be able to remodel her house, or when we inherit, we're going to invest in the business, as if they were just waiting for you to die to start really living." That revelation hit me like a ton of bricks. They didn't just see me as an ATM. They saw me as a temporary obstacle between them and their money. While I was exhausting myself to make them happy, they were already planning their future without me. After hanging up with Sarah, I sat in my kitchen processing all this information. 42 years of marriage to a man who truly loved me. 37 years raising a son alone after being widowed. And 3 years financing 2 adults who saw me as a wealthy nuisance. The doorbell rang and I saw on the new cameras that it was Dorothy with a plate in her hands. I opened the door and she offered me fresh-baked cookies. "I thought you might need some company after everything you told me yesterday," she said with that genuine smile I was beginning to appreciate. We sat in my living room and Dorothy told me more details about her own experience. "My son used to say the exact same things to me. You're like a second mother to me. We're special to you. Someday it will all be ours anyway." They're rehearsed lines, Barbara. They learn them from the Emotional Manipulation Handbook. "Do you think such a handbook exists?" I asked, half joking. "Not officially, but it seems they all read from the same book." Chapter 1. Make her feel indispensable. Chapter 2. Create constant financial emergencies. Chapter 3. If she resists, question her mental health. We laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. It was funny and tragic at the same time to recognize such predictable patterns in our own children's behavior. "Dorothy, did you ever feel guilty for cutting off the money?" "Every single day for the first 4 months," she answered honestly. But then I started to see the results. My son had to get a second job. His wife stopped her weekly spa treatments and started looking for work. They learned to live within their means. And more importantly, they learned that I was a person, not a resource. That afternoon, I decided to do something I had been putting off for years: visit my husband's grave. I always found excuses not to go because Thomas or Lisa needed something, or because the cab fare was better spent on one of their emergencies. The cemetery was quiet and peaceful. William's gravestone was slightly neglected because I hadn't been there to clean it in months. I sat on the grass beside his headstone and spoke to him as if he were alive. "William, my love, I think I got lost for a while. After you were gone, I put all my energy into Thomas. I wanted to be the best mother in the world, to somehow make up for him growing up without a father. But I think in the process I forgot to be myself." The wind blew gently, and for a moment I felt like he was listening. "Our son has become someone I don't recognize. Or maybe he was always this way and I just didn't want to see it. His wife is well, you know how she is. The money you left for me to live peacefully, I spent it supporting them. But not anymore, my love. I've learned." I cleaned his gravestone, replaced the withered flowers with fresh ones, and stayed there for another hour, just enjoying the peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't in a hurry to get home to solve some crisis for Thomas and Lisa. When I got back, there were 3 cars parked in front of my house again. My heart raced, but this time I was prepared. The cameras showed me it was Thomas, Lisa, and 2 other people I didn't recognize. They all seemed agitated, talking among themselves and pointing at my house. I didn't get out of the car. Instead, I called Mr. Patterson, my lawyer. "Mr. Patterson, they're at my house again. This time they've brought more people. What should I do?" "Don't get out of the car, Barbara." "I'm on my way immediately. And I'm calling the police." After our conversation yesterday, I filed for a temporary restraining order. "They are not allowed on your property." 15 minutes later, Mr. Patterson and 2 police cars arrived. I saw the officers talking to Thomas and Lisa, saw my son gesticulating furiously, saw Lisa crying again, but this time her tears didn't affect me. One of the officers approached my car. "Ma'am, you can get out now. Your visitors will be leaving." When I got out of the car, Thomas yelled at me from the street. "Mom, this is ridiculous. We're your family. You can't call the police on your own son." "Thomas," I replied with a calmness that surprised me, "family doesn't threaten you with competency hearings. Family doesn't enter your house without permission. Family doesn't treat their mothers like ATMs." Lisa screamed from the other side of the street. "You're going to pay us what you owe us. We have bills you cosigned for. You can't just abandon us like this." Mr. Patterson intervened. "Mrs. Walsh, any future communication must be through my office, and I suggest you consult with an attorney before making threats. Because my client has complete documentation of all the payments she has made voluntarily for 3 years. I watched them drive away, defeated but not surrendered. I knew this wasn't over, but for the first time in this situation, I felt confident. I had professional help, emotional support from Dorothy, and most importantly, mental clarity about what was right and what was wrong. That night, Dorothy invited me to dinner at her house. I met her son, who was visiting, and I saw with my own eyes what a healthy family relationship looked like. They spoke with respect, asked genuinely about each other's lives, and laughed together. The son didn't ask for money once during the entire evening. "This is what I wanted with Thomas," I confessed to Dorothy after her son left. "And maybe someday you'll have it," she replied. "But first, he has to learn that you are a person who deserves respect, not just a source of income." For the first time in weeks, I went to sleep feeling hopeful about the future. The next few days were strangely peaceful. The security cameras showed me that Thomas and Lisa would drive by my house several times a day, sometimes slowly, sometimes parking for a few minutes, but never getting out. It was as if they were studying my routine, looking for the perfect moment for their next move. Mr. Patterson had advised me to document each of these visits, so I kept a detailed log with dates and times. Their persistence will work in our favor, he had told me. Every time they show up after being told to stay away, it strengthens our case for a permanent restraining order. On Friday morning, I was having a quiet breakfast when the doorbell rang. The camera showed a well-dressed young woman with a clipboard in her hands and a professional smile. I didn't recognize her, but something about her posture told me this was not a social visit. "Good morning, Mrs. Walsh," she said when I opened the door. "I'm a social worker with Adult Protective Services. We received a report that you may be at risk and we need to conduct a wellness check." My blood ran cold. Thomas and Lisa had escalated the situation. It wasn't just threats from private lawyers anymore. Now they had involved the government. "May I see your identification?" I asked, trying to remain calm. "Of course." She showed me an official ID that looked legitimate. "I'm Rachel Morrison. May I come in to speak with you?" I let her in because I knew refusing would look worse for my case. Rachel sat in my living room and pulled a form from her folder. "Mrs. Walsh, we received reports that you have had significant changes in your financial behavior, that you have cut off communication with your family, and that you have shown signs of paranoia by installing unnecessary security systems. We were also informed that you have refused medical and legal help from your loved ones." Every word had been carefully chosen to make me sound like an unstable old woman. I recognized Lisa's hand in the phrasing. She had always been skilled at manipulating words to get what she wanted. "Miss Morrison," I said with all the dignity I could muster, "I would like to call my lawyer before I answer any questions." "Ma'am, this isn't a legal interrogation. It's a wellness check. If you have nothing to hide, there shouldn't be a problem with us talking." The phrase, "if you have nothing to hide," made me angry. It was the same logic abusers use to justify their invasions. If you're innocent, you shouldn't complain about your privacy being violated. "Ma'am, I am calling my lawyer. You can wait here or you can come back another day, but I will not answer questions without legal representation present." I called Mr. Patterson and he arrived in 20 minutes. When he walked in and saw the social worker, his expression hardened. "Miss Morrison," he said after reviewing her ID, "I hope you have a court order to be here because my client is under my legal representation, and any unauthorized evaluation constitutes harassment." "Sir," Rachel responded with less confidence than before, "we have reports from a concerned family about the well-being of Mrs. Walsh. It is our duty to investigate." "What family?" Mr. Patterson asked dryly. "The same family that tried to make her sign over power of attorney without representation? The same family that entered her home without permission and went through her private documents? The same family that excluded her from important events while living off her money?" He pulled a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table. "I have here complete documentation of financial and emotional abuse towards my client. $74,000 extracted from her accounts in 3 years. Systematic social exclusion and emotional blackmail. If anyone needs to be investigated here, it is not my client." Rachel reviewed the documents with growing discomfort. It was obvious that the information she had been given did not match the reality in front of her. "Mrs. Walsh," she finally said to me, "can you explain why you decided to cut off financial support to your son so abruptly?" "Because I discovered they were using me," I answered simply. "Because I realized that to them I wasn't a mother. I was a bank account. because I got tired of financing the lives of people who saw me as a burden. But don't you consider it your responsibility to help your family? The question infuriated me. Miss Morrison, my responsibility as a mother was to raise my son until he was 18, educate him, and give him the tools to be an independent adult. My son is 37 years old, married, and fully capable of supporting himself. Financing his adult life is not my responsibility. It is my choice. And I chose to stop. Mr. Patterson interjected. Miss Morrison, would you consider it a normal situation for a 37-year-old man to be unable to pay his own rent without help from his 70-year-old mother? Rachel didn't answer immediately. I could see she was reconsidering the whole situation. Mrs. Walsh, she asked after a moment, do you manage your own finances? Completely. I can show you my bank statements, my investments, my tax payments. Everything is up to date and in order. You live independently? As you can see, I keep my house clean. I take care of myself physically. I drive my own car. And I have healthy social relationships with my neighbors. Do you take any medication? Only vitamins and supplements. I have no medical conditions that require medication. Mr. Patterson added, my client has just undergone a complete medical evaluation as part of our legal process. She is in perfect mental and physical health. Rachel closed her folder and sighed. Mrs. Walsh, based on this conversation and the documentation I've reviewed, I see no evidence that you are at risk or in need of intervention. I will be closing this case. After she left, Mr. Patterson and I sat in silence for a few minutes. Barbara, this is going to keep escalating. Thomas and Lisa will not stop until they regain access to your money. We need to prepare for their next move. That afternoon, reflecting on the social worker's visit, I realized something important. I no longer felt like a victim. I felt like a woman who had taken control of her life and was willing to defend it. I called Sarah, my sister, to vent. Sis, she said after hearing my story, do you realize how far they are willing to go for money? They are risking family relationships, spending on lawyers and doctors, destroying their own reputation, all to regain access to your bank account. Her words made me reflect. Thomas and Lisa had revealed their true nature completely. There was no going back. There was no possibility of genuine reconciliation. To them, I had never been a respected mother or mother-in-law. I had always been just money on legs. That revelation, though painful, was also liberating. I no longer had to wonder if I was making the right decision. I no longer had to feel guilty for protecting myself. They themselves had shown that my emotional and physical well-being mattered less to them than my money. That evening, Dorothy came to visit with a bottle of wine. Barbara, I want to celebrate with you. Celebrate what? That today you resisted another attack on your freedom and came out victorious. Every time you stand firm, you become stronger. We toasted to my new strength, to my new life, to the freedom I had been waiting for without even knowing it for years. Dorothy, I said as we drank our wine, do you think I'll ever stop missing the Thomas he was as a child? Probably not, she answered honestly. But you will stop allowing that nostalgia to keep you a prisoner of the Thomas he is now. Her words held deep wisdom. I could love the boy my son had been without allowing the abusive adult he had become to continue harming me. That night I slept soundly, knowing that every day I was becoming stronger, more independent, and freer. Thomas and Lisa could keep trying to manipulate, blackmail, or scare me, but they had already lost their power over me. My new life was just beginning. 2 weeks passed without any news from Thomas and Lisa, and I began to believe they might have accepted reality. But on a Tuesday morning, as I was watering the plants in my garden, I saw an unfamiliar car park in front of my house. An older man in a suit and a young woman with folders got out. My heart sped up, but no longer with fear, with indignation. How many more times were they going to try the same thing? The man approached my door with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Barbara Walsh? I'm Dr. Marcus Rivera, a geriatric psychiatrist. This is my assistant, Miss Chen. Your family hired us to conduct an evaluation of your mental state." "I don't need a psychiatric evaluation," I said from my garden without getting any closer. "And you are on private property without authorization." "Ma'am," Dr. Rivera insisted, "your son is very worried about you." Every word was carefully chosen to make my empowerment sound like dementia, my freedom sound like external manipulation. Then they called their witnesses. Lisa was the first to testify, and her performance was Oscar-worthy. She cried as she described how I had completely changed, how I had become hostile and paranoid, how I had isolated myself from the family that loved me. "Your Honor," she said with a broken voice, "Barbara was always like a second mother to me. To see her mental decline has been devastating. We just want to help her get the care she needs." Lies wrapped in convincing tears. When Mr. Patterson cross-examined her, the cracks in her story began to show. "Mrs. Walsh, can you tell the court the last time you called my client for a reason other than asking for money?" Lisa stammered. "Well, we always talked about many things." "Can you give a specific date?" "I don't remember exact dates." "Is it true that you and your husband got married without inviting my client?" "It was a very small ceremony." "Is it true that when my client asked about the wedding, you told her you had only invited people who mattered?" Lisa turned red. Those words were taken out of context. What would be the correct context for telling your mother-in-law she isn't someone who matters? She couldn't answer convincingly. Thomas was next. Seeing him on the stand swearing to tell the truth as he prepared to lie about my mental health was one of the most painful moments of my life. This was the boy I had raised alone, to whom I had dedicated my entire life. "My mother was always very generous with us," he testified. "But lately she has become erratic and irrational. We believe she is being manipulated by people who are taking advantage of her." When Mr. Patterson cross-examined him, the mask fell off completely. "Mr. Walsh, how much money have you received from your mother in the last 3 years?" "I don't know the exact amount." "Would $74,000 sound about right?" "Maybe. She was always generous." "And how many times did you visit your mother without asking her for money?" The silence was deafening. "Is it true that you and your wife entered my client's home without permission and went through her private documents?" "We were worried about her." "Is it true that you brought a lawyer to pressure her into signing over power of attorney?" "We wanted to help her manage her finances." At 37 years old, do you need help from your 70-year-old mother to pay your rent? Thomas couldn't answer with dignity. George Franklin testified about my supposed erratic behaviors, but when Mr. Patterson questioned him on the details, he admitted he had never spoken to me directly and that all his information was based on superficial observations. Dr. Rivera testified that my refusal to be evaluated was evidence of mental decline. But Mr. Patterson presented the documentation from our evaluation with Dr. Santos, which completely contradicted his conclusions. Then it was our turn. Mr. Patterson first called Mr. Lee, my pharmacist. who explained how he had been tricked into signing a statement that misrepresented my medication purchasing habits. Dr. Santos testified about my excellent mental state, presenting the results of the cognitive tests, which had been flawless. Mrs. Richardson from the bank testified about my financial competence, explaining that my decisions to cancel automatic deposits had been completely rational and processed correctly. Dorothy and my friends from the gardening club testified about my lucidity, my new vitality, and my ability to maintain healthy social relationships. Finally, it was my turn to testify. I stood with dignity and walked to the stand, feeling the weight of 70 years of experience, of wisdom gained through pain, of strength discovered in adversity. Mr. Patterson guided me through my testimony, allowing me to tell my full story: the $74,000 spent in 3 years, the humiliation of being excluded from the wedding, the constant emotional manipulation, the invasion of my privacy, the legal threats. Mrs. Walsh, Mr. Patterson finally asked me, "Why did you decide to cut off financial support to your son and daughter-in-law?" "Because I finally understood that what I was receiving from them was not love," I answered, my voice clear and strong. "It was a business transaction disguised as a family relationship. My money was welcome, but I, as a person, was not." "Do you regret your decision?" "I only regret that it took me so long to make it." Thomas's lawyer tried to make me seem confused during his cross-examination, but I answered each of his questions with clarity and precision. When he tried to suggest that my new friends had manipulated me, I explained that for the first time in years, I had relationships based on mutual respect, not financial interest. In his closing arguments, Thomas's lawyer kept insisting that I was a victim of external manipulation. Mr. Patterson was devastating in his response. "Your Honor, what we have seen here is not the case of an incompetent elderly woman, but that of a woman who finally found the strength to free herself from years of financial and emotional abuse. The plaintiffs have presented no real medical evidence of mental incompetence. What they have presented is frustration because their source of income decided to exercise her legal and moral right to protect her own resources. Judge Harrison retired to deliberate for 2 hours that felt like 2 years. When he returned, his expression was serious but clear. After reviewing all the evidence presented, he began, "It is clear to this court that Mrs. Barbara Walsh is in full command of her mental faculties. Professional psychiatric evaluations confirm her cognitive competence. Her financial decisions, while they may be painful for her family, are completely rational and within her rights." My heart began to beat faster. Furthermore, the judge continued, "The evidence suggests that this petition is motivated by financial interest rather than genuine concern for Mrs. Walsh's well-being. The court completely denies the petition for guardianship. I had won. I had won not only the legal battle, but my freedom, my dignity, my right to live without being abused by those who were supposed to love me." As we left the courthouse, I saw Thomas and Lisa talking furiously with their lawyer. Lisa shot me a look of pure hatred before walking away. Thomas looked at me one last time, and for a second I saw something that might have been regret. But it was far too late. That night, Dorothy hosted a celebration at my house with all our friends. We toasted to justice, to freedom, to the sisterhood of strong women who support each other. "Barbara," Grace told me, "today you didn't just win a court case. You won your life back." She was right. For the first time in years, the future belonged completely to me. I could travel. I could love. I could create. I could live without fear, without guilt, without manipulation. 3 months later, I sold my house and moved into a beautiful apartment near the city center. I donated half of my money to organizations that protect senior citizens from family abuse. With the other half, I began to live the life I had always wanted. I traveled to Italy, took watercolor classes, and joined volunteer groups. I never heard from Thomas and Lisa again. I heard through the grapevine that they had had to move to a smaller apartment and that Lisa had gotten a job for the first time in years. Perhaps adversity would teach them what my generosity never could, the value of honest work and independence. Some nights when I look at the stars from my new balcony, I think about the woman I was a year ago, fearful, manipulated, believing I had to buy love. That woman is gone. And in her place was born someone who understood a fundamental truth: true love never has a price. And freedom is never too expensive. My name is Barbara. I am 70 years old, and I have finally learned that the most important person I have to love and protect is myself.